is our horsemanship of a standard where it cannot be judged to not be ethical. Now, if we can apply scientific principles to our horse riding, and if we can obey them, and if we can have really ethical horsemanship that corresponds with science, I think we can go on riding horses for many, many years. But if it can't be proven, if it can't be explained in scientific terms, I think that we might have a few people asking a few questions in the future. Hi everybody, we're putting together another video for you today. We're going to talk about conditioning responses. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a little while. Getting lots of feedback from the videos, lots of people asking lots of questions and really interested in how to teach the horse, train the horse in a way that corresponds with the horse's way of learning and understanding things, understanding the cognitive processes and using that understanding for better training. And so it seems like something that's really going to move forward in the equestrian industry. So we can only be really, really happy about that. Now let's talk about conditioning responses. We're getting into the big words now, conditioning. And I know over here in France, when we started talking about conditionnement, the conditioning, some people used to say, oh la la, let's not talk about just conditioning. We don't want the horses to be just conditioned, as if being conditioned was a bad thing. Well, I hate to break it to you, but everyone is conditioned. You can even get conditioned by your car. You jump in your car, you don't put your seatbelt on, the car will go bing, 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 bing. Now it's uncomfortable, now it's irritating you, isn't it? So you put your seatbelt on and that irritation, that sound, it goes away. And so the car has used negative reinforcement, the removal of something that's aversive, so the sound, so the removal of something aversive to obtain a more comfortable situation. And what did you do? Well, you put your seatbelt on. You removed the aversive situation, you removed the disagreeable situation, and you obtained a more agreeable situation. And that's called negative reinforcement, because the disagreeable thing was subtracted, it was removed, which is where the negative comes from. It has nothing to do with positive or negative emotions, absolutely not. So when we talk about conditioning responses, when we're working with horses, it kind of gets into some pretty tricky territory, but all equestrian responses, all horse riding responses, if you prefer, are conditioned. The horse learns to go forward, it's a conditioned response. There's leg pressure, the horse learns to remove the leg pressure, he must move his feet forward. When he understands that the forward movement of his feet removes leg pressure, that becomes a conditioned response. You can condition the response stop and turn as well. All equestrian responses or riding responses are conditioned responses. They're not learnt in any other way. They can't be learnt through reasoning. They can only be learnt through associative processes. The horse associates the removal of pressure with the response that was given, and he learns that this pressure obtains that response which removes that pressure, and that's the best response. Not for you, he doesn't care about making you happy, he cares about making himself comfortable though. So this is how we condition all the different responses, and that conditioning, when we use pressure and release, most people, anyone in horses nowadays, if you're not understanding the use of pressure and release and the timing involved, there's a few principles to pressure, and I'll talk about them in the next video, in one of the following videos, but everyone doing anything with horses needs to understand the principles of pressure. There is one pressure, an exclusive pressure that can obtain a response, and that response and the removal of the pressure must happen when the horse responds with a good response. So there's the exclusive pressure, there's the dosing, how much pressure do you put on, and how do you increase or how do you cause the horse to want to remove the pressure, where's the motivational level there, and the timing with which you remove the pressure, when does the pressure get removed. And now, if you're not using exclusive pressures and using the right dose of pressure and removing the pressure at the right time, you know, you're probably getting things wrong with the horse. So understanding how to use pressure, whether it's the pressure from the two reins, whether it's the pressure from your legs, whether it's the pressure, whether you're using a stick or whatever pressure, even if you're leading the horse, you're using pressure and release. Horses don't learn to lead by being towed around by humans by the head. You know, no human can pull a horse around by its head. They're kind of bigger than humans. But you could teach the horse that in order to remove the pressure of the halter, move your feet forward. And that's a conditioned response. Forwards, backwards, isolate the forequarters, or isolate the hindquarters. And these 4 basic responses, everything that you do in equitation, in horse riding, is based upon them. So there's kind of 4 responses on the ground: forwards, backwards, hindquarters, forequarters. Same thing when you're riding the horse: forwards, backwards, hindquarters, forequarters. And if you can do those 4 things with the horse's feet, upon that you can build most everything else. But if you can't walk forwards, walk backwards, isolate the hindquarters, isolate the forequarters, you probably haven't got enough control of the horse's feet to be able to do much. Now, I get a lot of horses turning up with trailer loading problems, and the basic responses aren't there. So it's pretty hard to put the horse's feet in the trailer if you can't control the feet already. So, some of the great horsemen in the past, they've talked about, it all comes back to getting control of the horse's feet. And it does. If you've got his feet, you've probably got his mind. And one thing's for sure: if you're controlling his feet, the environment, the exterior environment, isn't controlling his feet. And that's probably a really good thing, because if you're not controlling his feet, something else will, and suddenly you're sitting on his back and you become a passenger instead of a pilot. Now, better off being the pilot than the passenger when it comes to riding horses. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but how do we condition these responses? So most of these things are based upon pressure and release. Now, there is positive and negative reinforcement. I'll talk mostly about the negative for now, which means the removal of pressure at the right time. Pressure is applied, pressure is gradually increased. Now, that would, of course, depend. Some pressures you might want to wait on the horse a little while until he finds it. Others, if you wait too long, you might desensitize the horse, so you probably don't want to wait too long. What we basically look for is 4 seconds between when I start putting a light pressure on and when I get the result. So I'll often have to lift the pressure a little bit. If I spend more than 5 seconds trying to get the response, I might accidentally fall into that habituation or desensitization process, and the horse starts to get used to that pressure, and that's not what we're looking for. So I'll put the pressure on, gradually increase the pressure, and when the horse finds a good response, the pressure is removed. And that's basic operant conditioning. Now, what I would be able to do with that later is apply another type of conditioning, which is called classical conditioning. Talk about operant conditioning. There's a scientist called Mr. Skinner. He came up with that, used to talk a lot about operant conditioning. Now, classical conditioning, that's what we also know as Pavlovian conditioning. Now, what we do there is you would apply a very light signal just before you apply the pressure or the stimulus. So imagine that I was going to, let's say I was going to trot my horse and stop him. So I might teach the horse, I'll trot, I block my seat, you could say whoa if you wanted, and then stop the horse with pressure and release. So that means put pressure on, and when the horse finds the good response, remove the pressure. So I teach the horse to stop by pressure and release. Now, once I've got the operant response, which is trot the horse, pressure on, horse finds the good response, pressure is removed, stop, pressure is removed, and now the horse learns, okay, to remove that pressure, which might be from the reins in the beginning. If I stop my feet, that pressure is removed. And so you might say horses learn to stop by the removal of bilateral rein pressure. You might say horses learn to go forward by the removal of bilateral leg pressure, because it's the removal of the pressure that teaches the horse. And what you could do then is apply a Pavlovian conditioning. So that would mean you would apply a very light signal, a neutral signal, a signal that means nothing, before you apply the pressure. You've probably heard of Mr. Ivan Pavlov. Now, he was doing experiments looking at the digestion in dogs. And what he did was he eventually found out that the digestion would sometimes start even before the food. So the dog was making some sort of association and finding that, well, I know the food's going to happen now, so the digestive process starts and the dog starts salivating. Now, that sort of got him thinking. He thought, well, that's pretty interesting. Now, how does the dog know what's going to happen before what happens happens? If you've been around horses a while, you know that they pretty quickly learn what's going to happen before what happens happens. So what he figured out was, well, I'll put a signal on it. What I'll do is I'll make a buzzer or sound a bell or make a noise, and then I'll give the dog the food. And pretty soon when I make the noise, the dog's going to start salivating or producing saliva because he knows that the food's going to happen. Pretty interesting idea. We can use that in everything we're doing in animal training. So what you might do is you might block your seat, you might say whoa. Either way, both of those two things, they're not adversive or attractive to the horse. Blocking your seat isn't uncomfortable, and saying whoa doesn't cause much problem either. It doesn't. It's not neither attractive, nor adverse, it's not good, it's not bad, it doesn't mean anything. But it will start to mean something, because if I say whoa and then I stop the horse, and then I say whoa and then I stop the horse, then I say whoa and then I stop the horse, pretty soon the horse is going to figure, well, every time I hear that word, that sound, that vowel, that O, then we stop. So what if I was to anticipate, and what if I was to stop when I heard the whoa? Oh, well, then I wouldn't put the rein pressure on. So the horse learns to understand the voice. Or it could be my seat, which is probably not attractive, not adverse if it doesn't cause any pain, but it doesn't bring the horse any rewards either. I block the seat, I stop the horse. I block my seat, I stop the horse. I block my pelvis and I stop the horse. And pretty soon the horse learns, well, when I feel that, we're going to stop. So if I anticipate, I could avoid the rein pressure. And so I start listening back to the seat. Now that would be a good thing. And pretty soon you're able to teach the horse to respond to invisible aids. That's pretty good. And if we were going to go on with the whole whispering myth, the whole horse whisperer story, probably whispering could take on some kind of sense, couldn't it? It would be removing or making the language as subtle as it could possibly be, so that if I was to whisper to you, only you and I would know what I was talking about. No one else would understand. Now, if I was going to ride my horse in front of the public, what I'd be really looking for is that my horse and I would understand. No one would be able to see what I was doing. A really good dressage rider, you don't get to see much. You can't see all their aids. You can't see what they're doing with their legs and their hands because they're able to obtain more and more from less and less. And that's the goal, or should be, of every horseman. Can I get less? Can I get more and more from less and less? Am I able to do less and get more? So by doing that, I'd be understanding the conditioning responses. And people are getting good stuff done without understanding the science, but maybe if they understood the science, they could get even better stuff done, and that'd be terrific. So I'm just going to explain the whole scientific process of this conditioning, because I think it's important. Am I able to, for example, block the seat, stop the horse, teach the horse to listen to the seat? Am I able to use weight transfer and maybe just use a little outside leg, turn, and then turn the horse? And pretty soon when I look, some people, they say, oh, my horse is incredible. He knows what I'm thinking. I look over here and he already starts to turn. Well, he's not some sort of magical horse. What's actually happening is you're always doing the same thing before you do what you're going to do, and the horse learns, well, when that happens, this is going to happen, so he anticipates. And anticipating can be a good thing. And sometimes they're actually avoiding. It's almost an avoidance behavior, is where they're avoiding certain pressures. They say, well, if I go now, feel the seat move. If I go now, I'll be able to avoid the leg pressure. If I stop now, I'll be able to avoid the pressure in my mouth. I could teach the horse to back up just by going like that. Wow, how did you teach him that? Well, I did that, and then I made him go backwards. Then I did that, and then I made him go backwards. And now I only need to do that, and he goes backwards. Because he knows what's going to happen before what happens happens. And by teaching those things, you're able to do something wonderful for the horse. Now, I'll explain what that is. Operant conditioning is sometimes known as instrumental conditioning. When we use those words, operant conditioning means the horse becomes the operator. It's not just horse words, it's science. It means the operator of the situation to some extent, or instrumental would mean the horse was instrumental in the situation. So that would mean I'm putting the pressure on, I'm putting the legs on the horse, but the horse is instrumental in the situation. He knows how to remove the legs. I'm putting the pressure in his mouth, and the horse knows how to remove the pressure. Every pressure that I put on a horse, the horse must know how to remove it. Now, of course, there's exceptions. When I'm girthing the horse, there's not really any way to remove that. But I try in all the equestrian aids, all the ridden cues that we give the horse, try and make it so that every pressure that's applied to the horse knows what response can remove the pressure. Unavoidable pressures, that's just horribly cruel to a horse, and a lot of horses have unavoidable hand pressures. Over here they use some terrible contraptions sometimes to tie the horse's head in and down, and there is nothing the horse can do to remove those pressures. They can flip, they can fight, they can give up, they can do what they want, but when you're using these tight reins and different contraptions, mechanics, some horses, it doesn't matter what he does, he can't remove the pressure. Now, I think in the future, probably someone will step up and say, you know what, that's out. We can't do that anymore. And things are happening. Things are moving forward. See here in France last week, it's become illegal now to cut the vibrissae, the hairs off the horse's nose, because we know that they're actual nerves, that the horse can actually sense things. They're a sensory device. They're not just hair. Unfortunately, you can still remove the hair from the horse's ears in France. In other countries, you can't. And that's a good thing, because the hair is there for a reason. It's not just ugly hair that nature made a mistake with. And things are getting better. In some countries, you're not allowed to have a horse. You have to have two. That's a good thing, because one horse, that's pretty cruel, having a poor horse live all by himself and not seeing other horses. So the well-being of the horse, ethical horsemanship or ethical handling or ethical horse owning, is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, and people are saying, well, and non-ethical or cruel things with horses has become less and less acceptable. With animals in any area, cruelty is less and less accepted by the public. And in the future, we'll have to be really careful. Is our horsemanship of a standard where it cannot be judged to not be ethical? Because otherwise people will start to say, hey, what about horse riding? Is horse riding cruel? Should we do it or should we stop doing it? Now, if we can apply scientific principles to our horse riding, and if we can obey them, and if we can have really ethical horsemanship that corresponds with science, I think we can go on riding horses for many, many years. But if it can't be proven, if it can't be explained in scientific terms, I think that we might have a few people asking a few questions in the future. I notice some of the big aquariums here in Europe are running into trouble because people are saying, you know what, it's cruel having whales in swimming pools. No surprise there. People are starting to say, you know what, it's probably cruel sticking lots of spears into bulls and then killing them in public. No surprise there. But, you know, while all that's going on, when is it going to start happening to horses, to the horse riding industry? And it'll happen. It's just a question of time. But if we're really precise on how we're teaching horses equitation, I think we can avoid a lot of trouble. We can avoid people thinking that it's cruel what we do, and we can also remove the aids, the equestrian aids, to something very, very subtle, where instead of seeing people pull around and pulling on horses' faces and skiing on their face, and horses with their mouth open with big fat smiles and spurs sticking in their belly, that's not going to be acceptable in the future. So we need to understand, okay, how can we obtain good equestrian responses without using enormous pressures? And this is where the conditioning fits in. If you really know how to condition a response, you know that pressure starts off very light, it's built in the next 4 seconds. When the horse finds the response, it's removed, and then we repeat until the horse responds to the first phase of the pressure, which is very, very light. Then what we can do is apply the Pavlovian conditioning. So we put a signal that says this pressure is going to happen now, and the horse says, I start to anticipate, I know this is going to happen, and he responds before the pressure arrives. So now you're stopping horses without having to pull on his face, because you're stopping him with the seat. Now you're steering horses with the outside reins and with your legs, and he knows to stay between the legs because it would be uncomfortable. And now, instead of holding the horse in the box, you teach the horse, if you leave the box, it gets uncomfortable. If you stay in the box, it stays comfortable. And you teach the horse to maintain responses without maintaining the response yourself. Now, if we're understanding and applying all these scientific principles, I think ethical horsemanship will go forward, and no one will be able to say, hey, horse riding's cruel. But if they're not, well, maybe the questions will be asked. And even some of the great horsemen have and will find themselves in trouble if they're not starting to look at the scientific principles of what's going on, especially if they're going on belief systems rather than science. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think science will play a very big role in the future of how we understand horsemanship, and how at least we're not having bad interpretations of certain situations. Punishment, if it can't be proven to be correct or understood by the horse, needs to be put aside, or at least explained how it can be used correctly. So there'll be a lot of changes in the horsemanship. It will evolve. Some people say, well, it's been a couple of thousand years we've been riding horses, nothing's going to change. It will, a lot, in the future. And like every other industry, like every other business, like every other thing in the world today, it will change faster and faster and faster. Competition levels go up, communication gets easier, things that are unacceptable get shared very, very quickly. People have a voice more than ever since social media started. So, you know, there will be changes in the horse industry. So I'll just make it clear. There is pressure, there is the response, there is the removal of pressure. Horses learn to respond by the removal of the pressure. It's not the pressure. You can't ride horses by using your aids. You teach horses by removing them. An equestrian aid, as we call them here in Europe, it's just a pressure that's applied to the horse and needs to be removed at the right time. And every pressure, we'll talk more about that, they're all exclusive and they're very, very focused upon obtaining individual responses. You can't use the same pressure for obtaining several responses. One pressure, one response, removed at the right time. And then give the horse a Pavlovian signal. Now, the Pavlovian signal on the ground is probably body language. That's what it is. A very light change, and then get the response. And sometimes you can send the horse left, you can send the horse right, and sometimes it's just a little movement of the stick. And the horse says, yep, know what that means. If I go now, the stick won't lift higher, it won't start to move, and it won't touch me. So the horse learns, stick moves, go this way. Stick moves, go that way. He doesn't have to be frightened of it. If you can't move the stick without frightening the horse, now you're using flight response. And if you're using flight response, you're going to get very upset later because things are going to fall apart. You can't train the horse using flight response without falling victim to flight response. So you need to condition the responses, and conditioning in no case relies upon conditioning flight responses. We're not frightening the horse to go left, and we're not frightening the horse to go right. If you do that, you're going to cry. Trouble is coming. It's going to come undone. Don't do it. But you can condition responses. So a cue, a very light, subtle movement, pressure lifts, horse responds, pressure stops. Cue, you get the response. So in the beginning, there's a pressure, there's a response, and then the pressure is removed. And then later, you apply a signal, and then the pressure. And then there's the response, and then the pressure is removed. And in the end, there's a signal and a response. Now, when your horse is responding to pressure, he has an enormous gift. Something fabulous happens for the horse is that he is getting control of his environment. The horse is learning how to remove pressure, and he said, okay, if this pressure and I move here, this pressure I move here, this pressure I move here, this pressure I move here. Got it. I know how to remove pressure. So the horse is now, he has control of his environment. His environment becomes manageable. That's pretty good. He can manage his environment. For most horses, that would be just fabulous. Already, that would be already just great. But later, it gets better than that. The horse doesn't just get manageable. The environment doesn't just get manageable. It gets predictable. And predictable is even better, which means he knows what's going to happen before it happens and is able to avoid the pressure. Now, when predictability happens, that's about the best thing that you can do to a horse if you become predictable. Is that, block this seat, stop my feet, avoid the mouth pressure, seat goes forward, moving my feet forward now, avoided the leg or any big leg pressure. Felt that, might move across here now, yes, pop in a lead change, I just felt him move. So, and the horse starts to know exactly what you're going to do because you're sending very subtle signals to the horse, which is, in the next few seconds, I'm going to do this. In the next 4 seconds, block my seat. In the next 4 seconds, I'm going to stop your feet. Move my seat forward. In the next few seconds, and it'll only be a few seconds, it's pretty quick, I'm going to put on some pressure. But the horse will, if it's more than a few seconds, the horse is not going to make the connection between the two. You can't say, whoa, and stop your horse this morning and stop your horse this afternoon. You know, that's not going to work. Whoa, didn't look like that worked. I suppose I better stop him now. That's too long. You know, say, whoa, stop the horse. Say, whoa, 1, 2, 3, stop the horse. Put the legs on, 1, 2, 3, get him forward. Whatever it is, but make sure you're getting these responses in a short time frame, or otherwise the horse is not going to make the link between the two. You know, it's not being strict. Say whoa and then stop the horse an hour later. He's never going to make the link between the two. So you don't have a lot of time. Say whoa in the next few steps, 3, 4 strides, stop his feet, and then pretty quickly the horse will make the connection between the two. And you can become really easy to understand for your horse. If the horse's environment is manageable and predictable, that's about the nicest thing you can possibly do to a horse. And there's a lot more science to talk about, but conditioning responses, probably using as far as halter responses and leg responses and responses from the reins, all these things come from negative reinforcement. So using precise negative reinforcement, I'll talk about positive reinforcement another time, but getting very precise with your negative reinforcement is very, very important. Most people are training horses using negative reinforcement. Some of them have magnificent timing and understand exactly what they're doing. A lot of people don't. And that is causing horses a lot of trouble. And that is causing a lot of people to turn up here with their horses in a lot of trouble. And I make a very nice living out of fixing horses that are in a lot of trouble. But I think if people could understand that the problem isn't the horse, the problem is the human, and if they could learn how horses learn, they could teach their horses even better, which is the idea of putting all these videos out there. So, do you understand how to condition responses? Are you very precise with the pressure and release part? And are you able to apply signals so that the horse doesn't even need to respond to pressures, that it's getting so light that you're whispering and no one can see what you're doing, but the horse is understanding everything that you're up to? How good are you at it? Because if you're getting more and more from less and less, you're probably on the right track. But if it's going the other way and you're starting to need bigger spurs and bigger bits and getting less and less from more and more, maybe things are getting a little bit pear-shaped. It's all worth thinking about, but conditioning, understanding the conditioning responses and understanding the science, I really feel like this is going to be one of the things that moves equitation, that moves horse-human relationships forward into the next century. Worth thinking about. Talk to you in another video soon. Bye.